Well, a little bit about Koube. Koube was born in Cameroon and moved to Texas with her family in 1999. In Cameroon, her mother had a women's center where Koube and her sister often helped. She has always been involved in helping people, especially women and children. She holds a bachelor's of science in psychology at Baylor University. After her graduation, Koube moved to Arlington, Virginia, and obtained her master in forensic psychology at Marymount. Koube served in the Child Welfare League of America, and she later joined Arlington Food Assistance Center, where she worked for 8 years before becoming the executive director at the District Alliance for Safe Housing in 2017. Dash is built on three pillars: creating more safe housing for survivors, preventing homelessness, and facilitating access. Dash runs the largest housing complex for survivors of sexual and domestic violence in DC with 42 units. Moya is currently upgrading and reformatting the interiors of the said building. Dash's work during the pandemic, 4 times the number of survivors contacted Dash during the pandemic. It was even more challenging to serve them with the need to help keep social distancing. Her team had to institute new norms, limit volunteer activities, and move to remote action when possible. Still, they found a way to expand their services and launch a new program. With the turn of the year, Dash faces challenges to finance its programs and continue providing much needed assistance to domestic and sexual violence survivors. The average user of Dash is 27 years old, African American woman with 2 children. Well, Koube, we are truly honored to have you here as our first guest of this series of talks with prominent leaders of color striving to make the district a more livable city. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Koube, you grew up in Cameroon and then Texas before moving to Arlington. How does this unique experience and background make you who you are?
Oh gosh. Adrian, I feel like I don't even have to say much more because you've covered my entire life history. Um, well, I've always felt extremely blessed to call several places home. First one being Cameroon, West Africa, and like you said, my family moved to the United States in '99, and that was quite a shock, a culture shock. And how has it changed, my experience? I come from a very close-knit family, and I've always felt that I've stood on the shoulders of matriarchs. My mother is by far my biggest shiro, as is my grandmother, who I'm named after. And growing up in Cameroon and, the shift in coming to the United States, it made me a much stronger person. I was fortunate enough to have gone to the same boarding school that my mother went to back in Cameroon at the age of 13. Oh, well, I went in at 10 and left that boarding school at 13. And so, I really believe that the values that were instilled in me from my mother, and also all the women that I grew up around, made me the person I am today. And I still go back to those values every day. And it's an honor to know that those values are echoed in Dash. And our tagline is home means safety. And, my mother was my first definition of safety. She was the definition of home for me. And she actually was really instrumental in providing home and safety to close family friends who had experienced domestic violence in their lives. Some of them stayed with us for over a year when I was growing up in Cameroon. And little did I know that I would, my life would take the turn that it did, and I would ultimately come to be a Dash and serve as the executive director. So in many ways, it's made me who I am, and that experience. And people who know me very well know that every now and then my accent will change, and I will, revert back to speaking in Pidgin English, which is, what I spoke growing up in Cameroon.
Oh, nice. Oh, that's definitely pretty awesome. You mentioned a lot about your mother and your life back in Cameroon, but just wondering, so when did you realize this was your calling, helping others and working with other nonprofits?
Well, that story goes back to my mother as well. My first example of nonprofits was when she started a women's center back in Cameroon. I, served there and volunteered, right, voluntold, as a little girl. And when I moved to Texas, I actually studied psychology, and I was going to become a medical doctor. I was pre-med for a couple of years, and if anybody in the audience has ever had parents from the third world countries, you have a couple of options. You're either a doctor, a lawyer, or you go into business. And I remember very clearly having that conversation with my mother, telling her that um, I wanted to pursue a degree in psychology instead of becoming a medical doctor, and that I wanted to ultimately go into nonprofit work. And having done that work herself, she said, "Are you sure?" Um, because she did not, she knew that it was not a path that was an easy one. And but am incredibly, blessed and humbled to know that I was able to, continue to walk in her footsteps, and ultimately go on to do nonprofit work. I left Baylor University from Texas and moved to DC, worked at the Arlington Food Assistance Center, from 2007 on until I moved to Dash in 2017. And so it's been an incredible journey, and certainly a humbling one, to be able to be of service to people who look like me, and who are working to build better lives for themselves.
Awesome. Actually, the great segue. I was going to ask a little bit more about your stint at the Arlington Food Assistance Center. So you were there for 8 years, and it was a tremendous success. Did you envision having such an impact?
Oh gosh, I don't think so. So I started working at AFAC when I was getting my master's at Marymount University in forensic psychology. And I knew coming to the DC area that I could do anything. I could have gone and worked for a big firm, but I wanted to work at nonprofit while I was getting my master's. And I started off as the food drive coordinator, and that was in 2017. I had 3 jobs at the time, and worked from being a food drive coordinator. When I started at APAC, we were serving 700, about 700 families a week. And I moved on from being a food drive coordinator to then being the assistant director of operations, ultimately becoming director of operations and the chief operating officer. And by the time I left AFAC, we were serving well over 2,400 families a week. So more than I think 350% increase in in services and staffing, and also in the operations, and growing the number of delivery sites that we had. Um, and many people, when they think of Arlington, think of a fairly affluent community. It's one of the richest counties in the United States, and to see the disparity between how much wealth existed and still continues to exist in Arlington, and the amount of need that existed was really striking. And it was again, just incredibly humbling and an honor to have been part of making sure that well over 2,400 families did not have to experience food insecurity, and eliminating food deserts. And it also taught me a lot of what I know about executive management and nonprofit management, and helped prepare me to come on and take the executive director role at Dash. And so Arlington is one of the places I call home. I mentioned I have several homes, Cameroon being one of them. Arlington is certainly another home for me. The DMV area, and also my family in Texas. Texas is my third home, because I was there a good chunk of my time.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. Lastly, I want to ask a little bit about diversity. Do you feel like there's enough diversity and representation in leadership of nonprofits and policy-making organizations in this area, or in general?
That's a loaded question.
I know. Got the hard question there.
So yeah, let's go there. Is there enough diversity and representation in leadership? I think Dash is very unique. We have an incredibly diverse team, with leadership that really reflects the population we serve. Coming from, most of our team members are people who are Black and Brown, um, individuals, and expand the full range of diversity for the organization. As a as a movement, nonprofit leadership is not always as diverse. And when there is diversity, when you do have organizations that are led by Black or Brown people, you do find that are usually funded at lower levels. And even when they are, in addition to being funded at lower levels, which is another part from, challenging diversity in philanthropy, you also find that they lack the investment from the community to build out systems, which is something that Dash has done incredibly well at, in really challenging and pushing our philanthropy partners and our community partners to elevate the voices of people of color, to ensure that organizations like Dash get the resources that they need, and that we are providing the absolute best services that we can to communities that really need.
All right, that's pretty awesome. Uh, so, question. I wanted to ask a little about what was your motivation to join Dash, and how would you best describe the mission to people who aren't too familiar with
Mm.
beyond kind of the little snippet I gave?
Well, what was my um, motivation in joining Dash? So I had been at AFAC for, you know, almost 10 years. And about 8 years in, I started to think about what more or what else I could be doing. And while AVIC will always be close to my heart, I also knew that I wanted to continue my journey in nonprofit by serving an organization that was just as dedicated and truly committed to providing dignified access um, to communities. And Dash ticked all of those boxes for me. There is no other organization like Dash that does what we do. And for those who don't know Dash, we are the largest safe housing provider for survivors of domestic and sexual violence in the DC metropolitan area. And we provide, our tagline again is home means safety, and we provide the full continuum of services for survivors, from emergency to transitional to permanent housing options for survivors in the district, in addition to having our cornerstone location, which is the 42-unit apartment building Dash owns and manages. We also have scattered site housing programs throughout the region, serving survivors in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. Adrian, you mentioned our Right to Dream program. That is a new program Dash launched in August. So right in the middle of the pandemic, we did, we worked incredibly hard to launch a new youth program called Right to Dream for survivors of domestic and sexual violence aged 18 to 24, which is truly a vulnerable population right now that is not getting their needs met in the region. And all of Dash's housing programs are available for up to 2 years. And it's all apartment style. So really encouraging survivors and giving them the autonomy to live life on their own terms. Many people don't realize that domestic violence is a leading cause of homelessness. And we all have, I think everybody works to eliminate homelessness, but that will be impossible if we do not address underlying causes like domestic violence. And so Dash sits at that intersection of domestic violence and homelessness to ensure that no one has to choose between remaining in an abusive relationship or for their safety and having a place to call home.
No, definitely, you definitely helps understand the vulnerability of that group and why it's so crucial to have this program for them. So I want to get back into a little bit about some of the strategies that you use to engage your stakeholders here, and your do you call them your customers, your like the what is the word you use for?
I know everyone has a different term. We honor by calling them survivors, but also our residents. We are, I'm actually calling in from our headquarters in Cornerstone, and our survivors live here, and we are fortunate enough to work where survivors live, and so we call them survivors or by their names.
Okay. So what strategies do you use to engage them primarily?
We have an amazing team of staff members. Our community housing program team is really the entry point for all of Dash's housing services and advocacy services, including things like safety planning. And so when survivors are needing to get access into one of Dash's programs, they typically would reach out to one of our community housing program team members, and we're working with the Moya team on renovating that office space. So thank you all for the incredible service for providing Dash. We also have we work with several agencies across the region. We are part of the DC Coalition Against Domestic Violence, which brings together all the housing agencies that provide dedicated domestic violence services, housing, as well as culturally specific domestic violence services and medical services, legal services for survivors. So that's a body of 18, I believe, 18 organizations now. And we are also members of the DC Victims Assistance Network, which brings in agencies across the region from DC, Maryland, Virginia, and sometimes a little bit further out, who are providing victim services across the board. And so we get a lot of referrals that way. Many people hear from us from partner agencies. And sometimes we are also reached out. Dash has has had a national presence, and we have had survivors reach out to us from throughout the nation and sometimes internationally. Even in the past, we had to pick up a survivor who was coming in from another country, pick her up at the airport and get her to safety. So while our services are regionally located in the DC metropolitan area, there have been times when we have partners reach out from across the nation and sometimes internationally to either learn from Dash or also to access resources like our Survivor Resilience Fund that provides emergency financial assistance to help survivors remain safely housed.
That's quite an extensive network. That's pretty amazing. Uh, so back in September, in an interview for Spark Point, you actually mentioned that the COVID health emergency is creating like a double pandemic, as the survivors are unfortunately trapped with their abusers. And sadly, this silent pandemic is one that happens right in front of our eyes. It doesn't get covered much in the media. Do you think the general public is aware of the extent of this as an issue and the ramifications this has on children?
I think the general public is becoming aware. Um, and many people don't realize that domestic violence does not have a face. It can literally be anybody on this call. The general statistics are 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. And I have usually described the work that Dash does is serving as emotional containers for survivors, which is really heavy work. And with the pandemic, and we're going on what, a year now, of being in this state, and politics aside of how the United States handled the pandemic, the impact of COVID, of having survivors trapped indoors for extended periods of time, um, it's created a second pandemic of its own, with higher instances of domestic violence, and not just higher instances. Adrian, you talked about the fact that Dash was seeing 4 times the numbers of survivors coming to us for resources during the first couple of months of the pandemic. We are still seeing that level of need in the community, but we are also seeing higher lethality. So not only are more people at risk for violence, we have also seeing higher violence, higher levels of violence, and higher lethality. We have unfortunately lost 3 survivors to violence since the pandemic hit. And so it is something that I believe people are getting more attuned to. And in addition to the incredible violence, there is also the other pandemic of racial inequity and racial reckoning that we've been going through as a nation, and knowing that because of where we are as a nation, that the pre-existing inequities that were around before COVID that are now much more prevalent in communities of color, is the perfect storm, right? So the work that we do is not just to house, but really to ensure, the same way businesses have currencies. I've been telling the team that our currency is hope. We sell hope, and we make hope available and possibilities, and make sure that survivors have the tangible resources, from a roof over their heads, the tools they need to remain safety, helping them to safety plan, and then also the means, right? The financial assistance, whether it's through through our emergency financial assistance to keep them in safe housing, or the housing subsidies that Dash is able to provide for up to 2 years to ensure that they're in a stronger financial position to take hold of their own lives when they leave Dash.
It's a very powerful message. We sell hope. That's very powerful. I want to ask a little bit about, you mentioned, we already talked a little bit about the multiplier effect of COVID on Black and Brown residents. And I think we also wanted to then also shift a little bit to ask, just kind of in closing, about a little bit about Nash. I think you mentioned some of the national impact and working with people across the country, but since 2015, you've operated nationally as Nash. How do you coordinate efforts and take the vision on a larger scale so you can replicate programs and success across the whole country?
Absolutely. Dash launched a national project in 2015 called the National Alliance for Safe Housing, and we incubated that program and project for 5 years. They recently launched as a separate nonprofit. So in the pandemic, we also launched a new nonprofit.
Oh, wow.
We've been a bit busy. But the National Alliance for Safe Housing, which going back, I came to Dash in 2017 and took over from Peg Haskella, who was the founder of Dash, and Peg is now leading Nash, the National Alliance for Safe Housing, as a separate nonprofit. But the coordination between those two entities allows, which was, taking the Dash model, taking the work that we have done on the ground since we were founded in 2006, and really taking those best practices and working with communities across the nation, and sometimes again internationally, to help them design programs and get the technical assistance and training that they need to ensure that they're serving their particular communities in the best way that they need. Because how we provide services in DC will probably be completely different from a community in rural America, because they have different funding structures, they have different needs to the community, they also have different ethnicities and cultures that they serve. So that ability to tailor services to meet the needs of survivors, to meet survivors where they are, both in their current state and where they want to be in future, is really at the heart of what we do, both locally here and through our ongoing partnership with the National Alliance for Safe Housing.
Great. Well, we had a couple minutes before we close, but we actually wanted to take a couple questions. I think Paola actually had the first question. Uh, uh, she asked, are there any tips you can share to women in leadership?
Oh, thank you, Paul. Tips, be kind to yourself. Since coming to Dash, one of the biggest gifts Dash has given me is the ability to lean more into my leadership capacity as in emotional resilience. And in doing that, it's challenged me in ways that I never thought I would have to do. And through many of those challenging moments, I had to find the time to pause and be kind to myself. I am by far my own worst critic, and the voice in my head. And so for women in leadership, and I believe leadership is, everyone is a leader, right? No matter what role or where you are in your career, you're a leader in your own right. And so the ability to give yourself grace, to grant grace to others, and to reach out to the people that are in your circle when you need it. And stop saying sorry as much. As women, we always apologize for occupying space. And I am 4'11". I'll stand up at one point so you guys can see me. I'm 4'11", so I'm not very tall. But I had to learn to be gracious to myself and to not apologize for being a leader, and to lean on my community when I needed them.
Great. Thank you so much. Do we have another question? Aura.
Hi. Hi, I wanted to say hello and to thank you for being our first guest for the Moya Talks. And my question is, how do you feel that your lived experience in your history, you talked a lot about your mother and the background where you came from. How do you think all of that impacts your leadership or the way you lead people?
Oh gosh, it is, I can't separate it. Is it aura? Um, yeah, I can't separate the two. It is part of who I am, and I have I said it before, I'll say it again. I stand on the shoulders of matriarchs, and so my mother recently moved in with me, and I jokingly tell people my life is an ongoing episode of The Golden Girls. But it is just so it's really empowering for me to learn from her, to continue to learn from her, to continue to learn from all the women that I work with, and also to learn from how they're the things that they have learned growing up, and to ensure that I stay true to myself and stay true to my culture. And as a Cameroonian American woman, I'm also a very proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And so I am able to pull from all these women around me, and not forgetting the men in the audience. I have incredible supporting brothers. And grew up with all women. I never had a brother of my own, but since especially coming to the DC area, um, have been able to work with so many wonderful men that I now call my brothers through the Leadership Greater Washington LGW family, as well as, brothers that I've had from my time at Baylor University that I still talk to every 2 weeks, and on a family call. They may not be blood, but they are certainly part of who I am.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we actually had to close out, so we're at time. We have Koube. If there's any additional questions or anyone else who would like to reach out to her, we'll share her email address for you all to definitely reach out. And I'm sure if you don't mind.
No, not at all.
Great. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. And thank you, Koube. It was great having you here.